Welcome to the Texas Oil and Gas Podcast, the show dedicated to bring you the news from the oil patch deep in the heart of Texas, with your host, Ryan Ray and Josh Shelton.
And we're back with the Texas Oil and Gas Podcast. We appreciate you tuning in to today's episode. This is episode 204. Episode 204. I'm your host, Josh Shelton, friend and co-host Ryan Ray with me today. Ryan, interesting topics we're going to be covering here in just a bit, man.
Go ahead.
I'm ready to jump into it. How are things going on your end today? I know we got some cool weather, thankfully, in Texas. It's pushing along pretty good, man. I can't believe we're in May, and what is it, like 60s today?
Yeah, it's feeling nice outside. And a happy Mother's Day to all the mothers out there. Yes, I hope you guys had a good day and a restful day, and that your husbands were like me and unlike Josh, which gives your wife a restful day. I don't think, Josh, did you give your wife the day off yesterday?
I did.
Don't be lying, listeners. Don't be lying.
Hey, I kept the daughter, a little girl, during the church service. She got to sit in the service all day yesterday. So I call that rest.
You call that rest. There you go. Okay. But no, so it's Happy Mother's Day, and yeah, it's interesting time as always. It feels like if we get a little dip in the news, there was a period during the show for I don't know, a few months. It felt like maybe 2017, 2018. It was like, man, we're gonna talk about. Well, we don't have that problem right now, so that's good to know.
Yeah. So just jumping into it, man. So apparently yesterday, I say yesterday, I'm not sure exactly the timeline, but a pipeline, the biggest pipeline that runs from Texas to New York, was hacked. This is I believe it's the Colonial pipeline.
Mm-hmm.
So it was hacked, and then they shut it down. So there's some sort of a cyber attack. And from what I'm gathering, and there's a couple of articles here, what I'm gathering is that they're trying to hold some sort of a ransom for this pipeline, or for some of the data possibly. So they're holding a ransom, and so they're going to require a certain amount of payment before they're going to allow it to be opened back up. So I'm not sure all the specifics, but
shut down. So the pipeline shut down on Friday, and then on Saturday they acknowledged it was it been a ransomware hacked, or whatever term you want to use there. And so yeah, now this is quite interesting, right? Now is Colonial the one that Buffett has an interest in, or is that a different one?
I don't know.
Because he has an interest in one of those things. Let's see here. So how much do you ask to get this back online if you're the ransom guys? Like what kind of dollars we're talking about here?
That's a good question. I mean, we'll consult the people that are making the ransom.
Whoa! No, we will not. You can consult the criminals. Okay, no, I will not be a part of this publicly. I will not be a part of this at all. Contact me offline. Shoot me a DM. But no, I don't want any part of this. This is a comedy podcast, so let everyone know. Good night. What are you trying to do? Get us arrested? We're live streaming to the world right now. Okay. What are you trying to do?
Hey, look, our listeners know that anything that we do that's below the belt is always done in secret and never out in the open for everybody to see. So
no, I was gonna be convicted for a wanted felon on this podcast today. I wouldn't have showed up. Wow. Oh yes, he did. Yes, he did. I did not know. He was going there, man. You.
Well, neither did I. So right now they're saying that gas prices are gonna start bumping up. So have we seen a tick yet this Monday morning on gas, or just projected gas prices for the week?
Yeah, so it's when you look at it, it's I think tomorrow. So this is going to be for diesel, petrol, and jet fuel. I believe are so they carry 2.5 million barrels a day, 45% of the East Coast supply of diesel, petrol, and jet fuel. So I haven't looked at those prices. From what I understand, tomorrow's kind of the big day, right? So this is, of course, unless they sort it out by Tuesday, they're in big trouble. The first areas to be hit would be Atlanta and Tennessee. The domino effect goes up to New York. And, you got to think like this, down here in Texas, where it's coming from, going to the Northeast, you could have the ability to truck it a lot quicker than you can get it up to New York, right? That's what's in a pipeline. And so yeah, I don't know, man. It's weird, and we haven't talked about kind of vandalism on pipelines and stuff. That was kind of a running theme there for a while, where activists were, trying to break in or chain themselves or whatever they're doing back then. This has kind of been that threat that's been looming out there, which is what's going to happen when these guys get hacked. And I think it's concerning, right? I mean, so we need to get an IT guy. I don't know. I think we got something going on next week, but maybe the week after, get an IT cybersecurity person on to talk about this. But what do you do? And I mean, I'm saying this from a spot of ignorance, because if the FBI can't track down the people, right? What do you do? Do you pay the ransom? Well, if you pay the ransom, well, now what? They're gonna come back at you again. If you don't pay the ransom, though, like I don't know. I'm genuinely curious just how long it takes to track down someone like this, and to get them, and what kind of pinch Colonial's in.
Yeah, it's always one of the things I wonder. If you pay the ransom, is it like the movies where they get the money, kill the kid, and then go off in the sunset?
Well, that's the other thing, right? Is that who's to say that they're actually going to do? Like
right. That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's what I'm saying. That's a good
What
point.
leverage do you have?
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, it's a difficult situation. I'd hate to be in a situation with some of this, and I wonder what sort of data leaks that are maybe associated with that hack.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is a story that's going to hopefully will be resolved quickly, but will have lingering implications for some time. And so it says the gang tried to take almost 100 gigabytes of data hostage, threatening to leak it to the internet. And so, so this is all tech stuff. So it feels like there's some data they've gotten, some they haven't. But the pipeline's offline. And so, I don't know. It's the other thing is, and again, this would be a great question. We gotta get an IT guy on maybe the next couple weeks. Is so just something to think about. How do you know? It's like you remember Y2K, right? That was the big deal.
Yep.
How do we know? That Y2K is going to work? And so people were trying to put the computers forward and all this stuff, and obviously there's no big deal. But a similar question would be here, right? Is how do you know when you go to hit the restart button that there's not some embedded virus? And I don't think you can run your super anti-spyware on this thing and figure it out. You got to have a little bit more.
Yeah, I don't understand enough about any of this to really know how they can best protect it. I mean, I know that this is becoming a major issue. So I'm opening up a business here in Texas, and Google sent me a thing that said that some of my stuff on my account was messing up, and it was because they identified my account as being at high risk, being that I am a business, that I needed to get these thing called Titan keys in order for the system to work correctly. So apparently Google is aware of a growing threat that's coming. So they're trying to make it where you have like 2 sets of physical keys along with passwords and phone setups. And so I'm guessing that there's going to have to be some layered security measures, which I'm sure there's some, but I'm not sure.
That's the thing. That's the other thing is that when we eventually get to the point that this is resolved, will it be that Colonial had high level security in place and they still hacked it, or would it be that Colonial was behind the times and that's why they got hacked? So a couple comments here, and our guest is here. From Manu, Colonial is getting cyber attack and feds are after John McAfee. This is where we are. That's about right. And then from Joe, do attacks of this scale eventually draw the attention of agencies like the NSA, CIA, etc.? So yeah, I would think so. Obviously, the CIA doesn't do stuff in the U.S. We'll put that in air quotes. But yeah, I mean, obviously the FBI will be involved, and then whatever other government agency that they see fit to handle this. And that's another question, Joe, is where are these attacks originating from, right? Are they originating from overseas actors, or are they in the U.S.? So I think all of that will play in. But okay, so our guest is here. Let me see if I can get him up here on the big screen. There we go. Let me move him over here. Can you hear us, sir?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
All right. Well, good deal. Okay. So we have on Ian Palmer, or Dr. Palmer. And why don't you introduce yourself to our audience, and we'll get into why we have you on the show today.
I'm a petroleum engineer. Originally from Australia, I actually did a PhD in cosmic rays, of all things, and how they travel from the sun to the earth, and came to the US to work in Los Alamos, the National Laboratory in New Mexico. Fell in love with the Southwest, but couldn't stay there because I was an Australian citizen, and I wasn't quite willing to give up that citizenship at that. So then came to Tulsa, worked there for many years. Oral Roberts University, was on faculty there. Then joined Amoco, the oil production company, and then they were taken over by BP. And as part of that, keep my job, I had to move to Houston. So I spent 9-10 years in Houston. And by this time, I'm a petroleum engineer, studied fracking. Most of my career there, 15 years or so, and then retired from corporate and joined a small consulting company called Higgs Palmer Technologies, and retired from there about 5 years ago. Before I retired, I started giving classes on the shale gas revolution, which included a lot about fracking. And I gradually got into the environmental side of this. And about that time, earthquakes sprang up in Oklahoma. And nobody knew where they were coming from, but it eventually showed that they were initiated by the oil and gas industry, which is strong in Oklahoma. And so I kind of looked into that, and then I thought I'd write a book. And so I started writing a book, which is called The Shale Controversy. And while I was writing that, I thought, well, a big part of the controversy is now climate change. And so I got pulled into that. I didn't know a lot about it, hadn't thought a lot about it while I was working for oil and gas and fracking. But all of a sudden, I realized that was gaining importance. And so I looked into whether I believed it or not, and decided that I did. And then I looked into the consequences for the oil and gas industry. And I discovered some very interesting things in there, a lot of questions about the truth of the matter, and still are. So I wanted to become certain of that in my own mind. And so I added that to the book. So the second half of the book is about the shale controversy. Is it leading the world into success, or is it going to really damage the world? And so that's it, and in brief.
And the book is called The Shale Controversy. Okay, so we'll link to that as well as your website, which is iandexterpalmer.com in the show notes. Okay, so energy independence obviously is a term that's been used. I think it's a debatable term, depending on what you mean by independence. Of course, fracking has been a main driver in U.S. oil production. You said you've kind of studied this, Oklahoma, environmental impact. What's kind of your read on fracking, some of the pros, maybe some of the cons, maybe some stuff that generally should be added to the discussion that we're kind of omitting right now?
Yes. Of course, fracking is the key to the shale revolution. And I'll start with this because the shale revolution's been a wonderful thing for the USA. And and it's really only been around for 20 years. It was discovered about the year 2000. And the key technology, there's always been gas in shale. Shale is the most common rock in the Earth's surface. They've always known there's oil and gas there. The flowability or the permeability was so low that it wouldn't come out, okay, even with the kind of fracking techniques that they had back in the year 2000. They discovered, particularly in the Barnett Shale, which is our Fort Worth, that long horizontal wells, and I mean by that 1 to 2 miles long, if fracked many times along their length, and when I say many, I mean up to 40 separate frack operations along this horizontal well. Basically, what fracking does, it cracks up the rock. It creates cracks like you see in the sidewalk or in the roadway. And once an oil or gas molecule gets into a crack, it can flow almost unimpeded to the horizontal well, and then to the vertical well and up to the surface. So cracking up the rock, in this case shale rock, was the key, because now molecules of oil and gas could flow to the well in commercial quantities. And so it began in the Barnett Shale, which is a gas basin. And by 2009, it expanded to other basins too. But by 2009, people realized that oil price was higher than gas price. They could make more money producing oil than gas. And so they thought, well, we'll try the same technology. There's oil in lots of shales. So they tried the same technology, and bingo, it worked. And now all of a sudden they can produce oil in commercial quantities. And so that started in about 2009. And to illustrate the success, I mean, obviously this means cheap oil for our cars, and cheap heating for our homes, and cheap plastics that are used in the home and the office, and the car. But aside from this, we became self-sufficient entirely due to the shale revolution. The US became self-sufficient. President Bush said we'll never get there. President Obama said we'll never become self-sufficient. But the shale revolution enabled this. For the first time since 1947, the US became self-sufficient. This is the goal of every country in the world, because a successful oil and gas industry gives lots of jobs, but it also lifts millions of people into the middle class around the world. So I did a quick calculation of the money saved since 2000 by not importing oil, and it came out to $2.3 trillion. So in that 20 years, the US has saved $2,300 billion. I think that's what that converts to. And so it's a lot of billions of dollars. And if you divided that up in the states, that would be $4 billion each state, I think. So just to illustrate the savings in import-export. So we became self-sufficient, and so prices stay low there. Now, going to the other side of it, fracking is clearly controversial, I mean. And one example is the amount of water that is used in these 40 separate fracking operations in a horizontal well that's 2 miles long. The answer is 20 million gallons. And that doesn't mean too much, but if you poured that water into a football stadium, so that it stayed on the grassed area of the stadium, the water level would rise 30 or 40 feet. That's how much water, and it used to have to be fresh water. That's changed a little bit just in the last few years. That's an awful lot of fresh water, and that's just one well. So if a decent company drills 100 wells, that's 100 stadiums with this much water. So it costs, okay, if you buy city water, which they did from Fort Worth, that costs money, but it also can drain aquifers. So if a rancher in a dry state like West Texas or New Mexico, where there's an awful lot of shale wells, finds that he may find that his aquifer level is going down, and that's not in his best interest. And so one opinion by ranchers and people like that is that, hey, this is too much water to be used in a high desert or desert type country. On the other hand, in New Mexico, less than 1% of water usage, total water budget, is associated with drilling and fracking of oil wells. So if you look at it from a distance, you say, well, less than 1%. Heck, that's nothing. Agriculture in New Mexico uses 70% of the water, I think. In Pennsylvania, where you've got the famous Marcellus shale, which is a gas shale, that's the biggest gas shale in the USA. Again, it's less than 1% that's used on drilling and fracking. Most of it is, I think, nuclear industry and power places like that.
Let me cut you off. Make sure I follow along here.
Yes.
What you're saying is that we have this huge amount of water that the oil and gas industry uses, but comparatively speaking to how the water usage in the state, it's still relatively small. Is that what you're saying? Okay.
Yes. I'm saying there's two different perspectives on it. Okay, and that's part of the reason for the pros and cons. I mean, depends on where you're looking at it from, but that's exactly right. So another example is let me just add a caveat to that, and that is that nowadays, because of that scenario, people have realized that they need to clean up the water that's produced. Okay, so a typical well produces oil or gas or both, and water. Okay, the water that comes up out of the well is called produced water, and it's very often 20 million gallons, the same as what you put in. It's maybe not the same water; it may have come out of the formation, but so there's so what do the simplest thing to do is to clean up this water. And so over the last 5 years, companies have been doing that. Okay, they are able to clean it up by various evaporation, for example, is one. But they also realized that they could. They add a few chemicals to prevent iron settling out on the well. A scale is another one, and to stop the shale from swelling. So they have just a handful of chemicals. There's very few chemicals in there. They learned how to adapt these chemicals so that they would work in water that had been cleaned up. It didn't require totally fresh water. Okay, so that's the way the trend has been going, and there's been a lot of progress there. And so they're basically solving this problem. So the produced water that comes out of these wells, along with the oil or gas, is cleaned up, and then they can use it to frack the next series of wells. Okay, but another problem, which is also being resolved, okay, is damage. The old cherry that fracks were growing up into the aquifers and polluting the aquifers. Okay, that's still being used, and I'll explain that. In shale, which is I'll use that, talk about that for the moment. Most of the shale wells go down 5,000 feet. Some of them go down 15,000 feet. So 5,000 feet is 1 mile. 15,000 feet is 3 miles. So they're deep wells. Okay. They're much deeper than aquifers. Aquifers generally lie, the aquifers that people use to feed their cattle and to even, water their gardens and sometimes even to drink, are less than 1,000 feet, less than a fifth of a mile. They've made the industry has made measurements that prove beyond any doubt that fracs do not grow up into the aquifers. Okay, they just don't. They've made measurements that show how far they grow up. They grow up a little ways, but nothing, never that high. Okay, so that clarifies that, but still occasionally aquifers get polluted. And the reason for that is the well integrity. You've got a vertical well drilled down, and then that kicks off into a horizontal well. And that vertical well, the casing is set in a rough-hewn hole that's been drilled, kind of a jagged hole. You have to seal, you cement the casing against the hole. So you pour cement down there, and it comes up, and it seals. It's supposed to seal all the way to the top, so that if the seal is not complete, if there are leaks in that cement, then gas can seep up there. Frac fluid, less likely, but that can seep up there. And so gas can get in the water. This happened in the Marcellus Shale. There was a big row about this 10 years ago. And that was the cause of it, okay? And oil and gas companies now are much more in communication about this. They're more transparent about it now. Okay, if you've got water in the gas in the aquifer, then check out that cement seal. If that's leaking, fix it, okay? Redo the cement, whatever you have to do. Fix it, and fix it quickly. And the press that have pointed this out over the years, rightly so, have gotten a lot of attention, and the companies, have to respond quickly and say, we'll fix that problem, okay? So it's fairly rare that happens. They've done lots of studies that prove that it's fairly rare. But if it happens, it needs to be addressed quickly. So that's another example of pros and cons. If you know somebody that had a well that leaked like that and leaked into the aquifer, then you don't tend to forget it, but it's fairly rare. Of course, it was the problem. I'm trying to remember the name of the big rig down in the Gulf of Mexico that blew out there.
Horizon or
what the heck? Anyway, 11 people died. It was a terrible tragedy. That apparently, there's a movie about it, of course.
Deepwater Horizon.
It was due to an imperfect cement seal, and gas came up and eventually caught fire, and that rig burned down basically. So, that's at one extreme of it. But the little gas wells in the Marcellus are at the other end of it. But still, if you get gas in the water, that's a huge concern. So, should never happen.
Right. So one thing with the water, that when you look at all the salt water that surrounds the earth, right? 66% or something like the earth is salt water. One of the things I've wondered about that we might look back on the Shale Revolution and say is, okay, we've had to figure out new techniques to deal with water, right? As you mentioned, initially we had to only use fresh water, and now we're using a little bit more, less fresh, a bit more brackish water, if you will. We've had to figure out how to handle produced water. Now, that's not necessarily one-to-one to get desalinization cheaper, but it probably helps that process. And so some of these things that we're doing, I think will further research in other areas so that eventually we can probably make desalinization cheaper, or figure out how to clean brackish water for a cheaper price to turn it into potable water. What are your thoughts on that?
My brother is a desalination expert in Australia, water engineer all his life, and he's been involved in building plants. Australia is a very interesting case, and we may come back to that when we get into climate change, because I was there when close to when the big bushfires, the wildfires broke out. My brother in Adelaide, South Australia, where I'm from, the drought lasted many years, and only towards the end of the drought, they decided to build a desal plant. Okay, and it worked fine. It worked great, but of course the drought stopped as soon after they built it. So I think they use it for other purposes now. It's now apparently it's now it's in the price range that it's definitely affordable. The Middle East has lots and lots of these. California has quite a few, and Australia has several desal plants too. That is of course one option for the oil industry. Okay, it's the expensive end of the option compared with something like evaporation at the local well site. And so I don't think it's used very much, but in the future it may be used more. I really don't have a prediction on that, but there are several different techniques that they use, and some of them are like the membranes that are used in desalination. So yeah, there's some cross pollination going on there, I think, but that's my thoughts on that.
Okay, well, let's see here. So I know you want to talk about carbon capture and net zero emissions. Kind of what's the concern there from your standpoint, and how should the oil and gas industry deal with this?
Yeah, this is a big question, and I'll start with this point. Most of the goals of global warming, climate change are fixed on 2050 as kind of a deadline date. Okay, and the UN was behind that too. I think the intergovernmental, people too. People have realized, people such as Daniel Yergin, that the oil industry, he says it's an $87 trillion industry. You can't change that over within a decade. No possible way. BP has looked at this, my old company, as solidly as anybody. They say, and other companies agree, but that by 2050, we'll have oil and gas will be 30 to 50%. Okay, I think it's 35 to 45% oil and gas consumption by 2050. It's obviously not going away, but now it's come down a lot because now it's 80%. Okay, fossil fuels. So, so how can you get to zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050? The only way you can do that is by having carbon capture and storage, CCS, okay? And that's because if you can capture it and store it underground, then that defines net zero. So net zero is a tricky little phrase that means that by 2050, you are putting up into the atmosphere X billion, billion metric tons per year, where you hope that X is like just a few billion tons per year. Now it's 35 or 40. Okay, so but you're not down at zero emissions. Okay, that won't happen. Okay, so you compensate by somehow storing, capturing and storing underground's the best way. The greenhouse gases, the CO2 mainly, so that the same amount that you're storing is what's still being released into the atmosphere, the leftover. It's the only possible way. Okay, you're never going to get to zero emissions of greenhouse gases by 2050. So carbon capture, the storage part, capturing is hard enough. I mean, you can put special chemicals like amines, which are expensive, in power plants, in the chimneys of power plants, and that can capture, a goodly amount of the CO2 that's from burning coal. Okay, but they're expensive, as I said. What's an alternative? Well, that's capturing it. Okay. Now, Occidental, which are a very proactive oil company down in the Permian Basin, West Texas and New Mexico, they are they're setting up, I think it's to be built this year, maybe next year, a direct air capture. They've got a bank of fans, huge fans in a huge wall of fans that pull the air in, and in there they capture by probably a chemical means the CO2. And then these guys, Occidental, they know all about injecting CO2 underground. They've been doing that for years. And so they do that. The chairman, Vicky Hollub, is an amazing woman, in my opinion. She says that they're injecting more CO2. They're getting rid of more CO2 every year than Elon Musk is with the new Tesla cars. So that's pretty interesting. But they're proactively really going at that. So back to the second part of it is the storage. Okay, so basically you have two wells. You drill two wells. One into it can be an old oil field. It can be an aquifer. It can be a shale. Okay, so you drill one vertical well down. You inject the CO2 down there, and then a couple of a kilometer away or something, you have a production well. And if you're wanting to produce oil, then you can. I'm ahead of myself. Forget the production well. If you just want to store the carbon, you just inject it down the injection well, and it stays there. There's very low chance of it leaking out of that where you're injecting it. That's been shown over and over, and so it just stays there and stores there. Eventually, it joins with the rock. It kind of becomes a part of the rock. Chemical reaction, and so it stays there forever. What the oil and gas people have done for decades, and this is key because they know how to do this. They know exactly how to store CO2. They have an injection well and a production well, and so they inject the CO2 in an old oil field. The CO2 mixes with the oil. It kind of lubricates it. It softens it up. The oil flows to the other side of the reservoir and is produced up the production well, and so you're making money, okay, and that's why the oil companies have been doing it. You're making money because you sell the oil, but you're not storing all the CO2. Some of the CO2 is coming out, and so I kept thinking that's a big disadvantage until I found out that 40% of the CO2 stays down there. That's according to Vicky Hollub. So that's why she's been saving a lot of the greenhouse gases. So that's the CCS. Can I add one other thing to that?
Yeah, real quick, because we are getting up against our time here. So real quick. Okay.
This is pretty key. Okay. If you look at all the old oil fields in the USA, okay, they could inject into them all of the US production, which is 6 billion tons per year. They could take all of that amount if it was set up, and for 23 years. There's an enormous storage potential in the US, okay? So if they had to store only one half of that, they could do that for 46 years, etc. Okay, so there's immense scope for this. Unfortunately, it costs. If you just store it, okay, there's going to have to be carbon pricing or something to from the government set up to do that.
Okay, well, we are, as we said, up against the clock here. The book is The Shale Controversy: Will the Shale Revolution Lead the World to Prosperity or Calamity? We will link to that in the show notes, along with your website, which is iandexterpalmer.com. Dr. Palmer, it was a pleasure to have you on today. Thank you so much for your insights, and look to get you on again in the future.
Would love to. Thank you for having me.
Thanks,
okay.
Ian.
All right, Mr. Shelton, what we got up here to round this out?
All right, for the roundup, we have EOG embraces double premium drilling strategy. Take a look at it. It's interesting, some of the strategies they've been doing. And so supposedly on May 7th, they had a earnings report, and they were saying that they're getting some really good results from the strategy they've been employing. We also have Texas lawmakers brace for a war on the oil and gas sector. This is just looking at it from some legal things that Texas has been preparing for. And we have two more. One, I was going to mention this one. Capturing methane from oil and gas operations is doable and profitable. So this is an article from Forbes. If you're interested in stuff like this, it might be something worth taking a look. And last but not least, Ryan, we actually may circle back to this one next week. Our friend David Blackman, he released an article, Texas grid set to remain vulnerable to blackouts as legislative session winds down. So key little phrase here, let me find it. Let's see. It is right here. So here's what Texas citizens seem likely to get from this session. A bailout for the power generators who refused to winterize their plants after the grid failed during the 2011 freeze blackout event, and a bailout for the electric providers who were forced to purchase power from the generators at exorbitant rates during the big freeze. The winterization will hopefully result is important for the eventual stabilization of the Texas grid. Go ahead, Ron.
I said the big freeze.
Big freeze.
Okay. Well, hey, before we go, two things. One, go click that 5-star button and just tell us, pour out your heart and soul on why you love us. Also, if you want to report Josh to the FBI hotline, feel free to do that. I am not a part of that. And share the podcast. Get the word out there. We'd appreciate it. And Josh, I think that's it. We'll be back next week. I think we have on Jay Young. We'll be back on next week. And until then, I hope everyone have a good week and